Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome to Lost in Adaptation. This is a review show that focuses on discussing the differences between film adaptations of books to said books with a goal of judging how loyally they stuck to the plot and themes and if any changes were made were an improvement or a detriment to the story overall. Judging by the result of the Patreon survey, this is one of those wait, that was based on a book kind of situations, which are not unheard of but interesting when they come up nonetheless. Christopher Priest is an acclaimed British author with a variety of publications to his name, almost all of which have the word "the" in the title. His genre of choice is primarily science fiction, often with some horror elements mixed in. Interestingly, he's also written a ton of movie novelizations and tie-ins, though those are usually published under various pseudonyms. Priest was a huge fan of H.G. Wells, even becoming vice president of the H.G. Wells Society, and his influence on his work is pretty clear. Put very, very simply, The Prestige is a story of two famous 19th century stage magicians locked in a lifelong feud and rivalry. It hit shelves in 1995 and, by all accounts, did pretty well with general readers and critics. As the survey showed, it's not quite worked its way into general awareness and popularity, but it certainly wasn't unsuccessful by any means. The film adaptation was a long-term joint passion project between its director, Christopher Nolan, and his co-writer, his brother Jonathan. The script was written between them over a period of about 5 years. When it was finally ready, there was a slight delay when Chris had to dash off to direct Batman Begins because one does not keep Batman waiting. But between that film and its sequel, they found the time to film The Prestige. And he even brought Batman back with him, isn't that nice? The film boasted a star-studded cast of Christian Bale, Hugh Jackman, Scarlett Johansson, Michael Caine, Rebecca Hall, Andy Serkis, and David Bowie, amongst others. As much as it pains me to have to give away the single most significant conclusion of this review right at the start, I feel I have no choice but to announce that, despite sharing its title, this film has so little in common with this book, attempting to compare the two in my usual three-part format would be somewhat impractical. Thus, this will be an in-name-only episode, which, for the newer beautiful watchers amongst us, is where I do my best to synopsisize the plots of both versions of the story in the expectation that the myriad of differences will speak for themselves, then wrap up by mentioning just what I consider to be the juiciest observations adaptation-wise. Even though the book came into existence first, and I personally read it before seeing the film, as my survey suggests it's going to be revelatory to the most people, I'm going to save it for the second half to add more drama, because I too am a showman. Before we begin though, I should explain the pickle I'm in, because I'm not going to lie, synopsisizing this film in the way it was presented would be a daunting task, as it is told super out of chronological order. It starts with the death of one of the leads, and I assumed the following courtroom scene was going to be a framing device for a fairly linear story from then on, but no, it was just one of several timelines that would be progressing throughout the movie. Then, to make matters worse, there's also flashbacks to earlier times in those times, and both men read each other's journals, but I guess one of them is reading the journal within the other journal, so you get yet more timelines introduced within timelines, and I don't know if I'm just getting old and tired, but I was struggling to keep up with which bit was which because each character doesn't look any notably older or younger at any point, and just frickin' hell, Christopher Nolan. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, giving you the plot in chronological order is going to be a bit misrepresentative of this film, but I don't think I can do it otherwise without giving you a shot-for-shot description of every bloody scene. To make matters worse, it's going to seem a little unfair because I intend to describe the book's plot, which is also not in a strict chronological format in the way it was presented. But the key difference is the book involves the telling of the same period of time and events from start to finish from one perspective, then from a radically different perspective, and the way the first lays the groundwork for the second and the way the second recontextualizes the first is absolutely essential to the story. And you must forgive me for being so bold, but the film, in comparison, is just not that deep, bro. It offers a single third-person perspective of a shared story, and the decision to show events out of order appears to be a purely artistic one. So, yeah, here's the plot in chronological order. Sometime in the 1890s in the city of London, Robert Anger, his wife Julia, and his BFF Alfred Borden are working as apprentices to a stage magician along with John Cutter, an experienced engineer. The big closer of their show revolves around Julia's dangerous water tank trick, and despite being expressly forbidden from doing so, Borden insists on attempting to improve it with a fancy new knot, which backfires and gets her killed. Borden claims he can't remember if he knotted the bad knot or not, which drives Anger mad with rage. When Borden tries to start a solo career to support his pregnant wife, Angier attempts to murder him. However, he only succeeds in blowing off 2 of his fingers due to the interference of Borden's silent but very loyal assistant Fallon. Shortly later, Cutter encourages Angier to start his own show, and they hire a sexy assistant called Olivia, who eventually starts a relationship with her boss. Avenging the loss of his fingers, Borden sabotages Angier's first new trick, horribly murdering an innocent bird and injuring an audience volunteer. Alfred and Black Widow hope there might be an end to the fighting, but seeing Batman having the happy family life he feels was denied to him, Wolverine continues to spy on his former friend, waiting for a chance to attack. However, he's thrown off his game when he witnesses Borden pull off what appears to be a genuinely impossible magic trick, instantly teleporting himself from one cabinet to another in plain sight of everyone. Wanting to compete, but utterly unable to figure out how he does it, Angier is forced to employ an alcoholic lookalike to recreate the same effect, which works and is even more popular because of his better showmanship, but to his chagrin requires him to miss out on basking in the glory of the regular standing ovation. His mounting obsession eventually leads him to requesting that Olivia go and work for Borden and spy on him until she discovers the secret method to his trick. This immediately backfires as Olivia feels scorned by Angier and quite taken with Borden, resulting in her switching sides for real and giving away enough key information about Angier's show to allow Borden to sabotage them all with increasing maliciousness. She eventually gives Angier a chance to redeem himself by giving up on his obsession and refusing the notebook she had stolen from Borden and taking her back instead, but he fails the test and chooses the notebook, despite it being written in code and useless to him without a keyword to decipher it. Angier's next step is to kidnap Fallon and demand Borden's secret as ransom. Borden claims that the secret is the same as the keyword for his journal: Tesla. Borden celebrates rescuing his best friend by getting drunk, bringing his mistress to dinner, and verbally abusing his wife. There's been a recurring theme throughout the film so far where their relationship seems to be either extremely good or crazy terrible depending on the day, and the roller coaster is clearly making Sarah sick with anxiety. Angier travels to America to seek out Nikola Tesla. He's initially blocked by his assistant Mr. Ali, but after a failed investment drive, his need for more funds forces Tesla to invite Angier to meet with him. It turns out Borden was trying to send Angier on a wild goose chase by name-dropping Tesla, but Tesla is actually able to build a working teleporter for him. Sort of. The device ends up creating a copy of what is being teleported at the intended destination, leaving the original unmoved. Angier decides this is good enough. Incidentally, there is like a ton, like so much dialogue surrounding the theory that the transporter in Star Trek also runs on this principle and simply disintegrates the poor soul using it before creating a perfect copy somewhere else. It's a rabbit hole school of thought that I may or may not have fallen down many times. Anyways, back in England, Borden and his wife's marital problems increase until she is eventually driven to suicide, and Olivia gets fed up with dating men who don't care about anything but magic and dumps his ass. Angier makes a big return to the stage and blows people away with his teleportation trick, making it Borden's turn to become the jealous obsessive trying to figure out the secret method to it. He disguises himself and sneaks backstage, only to witness Angier fall into what appears to be the same tank of water that killed his wife Julia. He actually tries to intercede and save him, but can't, and is arrested and convicted for murder. While on death row, he's approached by a solicitor representing a Lord Cardlow who wishes to purchase his old equipment and secrets. As a sign of good faith, he offers Borden Angier's old journal. Borden discovers a secret message from Angier on the last page that has to have been written after his supposed death. He demands to meet with Lord Cardlow and discovers he's Angier in disguise, or to be more precise, Angier was Lord Cardlow in disguise this whole time, hiding his real name to avoid embarrassing his aristocratic family with his career. He's adopted Borden's daughter and was going to use her to try to force Borden to give up his true magic secrets at last, but has decided he just doesn't care anymore and wants to see Borden suffer. Borden is hanged for the crime he didn't commit, but the artist formerly known as Angier doesn't have much time to celebrate as he's almost immediately murdered by Borden. It turns out there have been 2 Bordens this whole time, identical twin brothers who have been taking turns tweeting on the main and living in disguise as Fallon. As he's dramatically slowly dying, Angier explains that he's been murdering one of the copies every time he uses the device by dropping them through a trapdoor into the water tank. He was under the, as far as I can see, utterly evidenceless belief that the man who steps into the teleporter has a 50-50 chance of being teleported or being left behind to die, and that suffering a painful death for one's art is a noble thing. Cutter, who is pissed that Angier went so far to the dark side, betrays him and rescues Borden's daughter for him, and the film ends on a panning shot of all of Angier's bodies that he apparently kept in the tanks they drowned in for reasons. Just as a film, I'm not doing any cartwheels for it, but I also don't have any major complaints aside from the rant I went on about the structure. What can I say? Nolan's famous disdain for traditional chronological storytelling is a bit hit and miss for me, and in this case it was a definite miss. However, the cast is super strong across the board. I'm fairly neutral on Christian Bale usually, but for some reason he fits the role of the obnoxious perfectionist with temper issues really well. Hugh Jackman is an absolute delight in everything, and this was no exception. Michael Caine is an absolute legend, enough said, and the only issue I had with Scarlett Johansson is how painfully underutilized she was. On a personal experience note, amusingly, I just happened to have finally watched The Greatest Showman all the way through for the first time before seeing this film, so I kept half expecting Hugh Jackman to burst into song every time he got dressed up. Right, let's take a gander at that book of the same name. Now, do remember that while there will be some recognizable overlap, on the whole, it's better to try to forget all that you just heard about the film. The novel is divided into 5 parts. Parts 1, 3, and 5 are a framing device set in the, at the time of publication, contemporary 1990s. Part 2 is the published memoir of Alfred Borden, and Part 4 is the personal journal of Rupert Angers. Part 1 begins by describing the recent life of Andrew Wesley, a journalist convinced he has an inconsistent psychic connection to a long-lost twin brother separated from him since childhood when they were adopted. A woman by the name of Kate Angers sends him a book, a memoir of the late 18th century stage magician Alfred Borden. When they meet, she reveals that this Borden fellow was in a lifelong feud and rivalry with her great-grandfather Rupert Angers, who was also a famous performer at the time. Andrew sticks around because he feels his connection to his brother is super strong at her house, and he's also a total creep who makes it super clear that he wants to bang her. The book then segues into Part 2 without much warning, and we begin the self-important ramblings of Alfred Borden. Through his introduction and early chapters, you can glean that he is a man obsessed with perfecting the act of being a magician, and early in his career came to believe that nothing short of complete devotion to one's act every second of one's life is sufficient. Living the act, as it were. He holds several other very specific opinions on how magicians should behave and how they should approach magic, and is pretty hostile towards anyone who feels differently, so he's a douchey gatekeeper, essentially. One such belief is that while a magician must protect the secret method of his act at all costs, he is also morally obligated to never openly mislead people and outright claim that he is performing genuine magic. This is the belief that leads him to make the first strike against Rupert Angers, for he has started making a living using stage tricks to convince the recently bereaved that he is a medium, passing on comforting messages from beyond the grave. Offended by this misuse of magic tricks, Borden intervenes and exposes Angers mid-act. There's a violent confrontation in which Borden goes as far as to assault Angers' assistant Julia, knocking her to the floor before being ejected from the residence. After reflecting on it for a month or so, Borden realizes what a dick move he had pulled and writes a letter of apology to Angers, but it is sent back in shreds, and shortly later Angers starts interfering with Borden's performances, finding creative ways to ruin his tricks and humiliate him. And thus begins years of retaliatory pranks on one another. As one might expect, Borden admits to his side of it, but glosses over the exact details of what he was doing while explaining Angers in great detail. Borden talks about his signature trick, the new transported man, and seems almost tempted to explain how it works before his core belief in never breaking the magician's code reasserts itself, and he drops that in favor of simply describing its evolution over time regarding how it appeared to his audience. The key info being he appears to transport himself from one cabinet to another across the stage in less than a second. Borden takes satisfaction in the fact that while Angers did eventually outdo this trick, he never managed to do it as quickly as him, or figure out how Borden pulled off his version of it. Borden eventually hires an attractive young lady by the name of Olivia, who he immediately starts an affair with despite being very happy with his marriage and children. Olivia eventually admits that she was a spy sent by Angers, but she had genuinely fallen for Borden now. Borden is upset, but he offers her forgiveness if she passes on some false information to Angers to throw him on a wild goose chase. This seems to work as Angers vanishes, and for the next few years doesn't seem interested in restarting their rivalry. However, news eventually reaches Borden that Angers has made a big return and has a new trick that makes his look dull in comparison. This isn't strictly true, as the tricks are actually pretty comparable. Angers disappears in a flood of electrical sparks on stage and reappears about 15 seconds later at an impossibly far distance away at the back of the theatre. However, it really gets under Borden's skin that he can't figure out how he does it, as he can rule out his own method and knows for sure he's not using a lookalike. This drives him slowly mad for a very long time, and he even considers begging Angers for the answer. Eventually, he sneaks back backstage during the act and discovers a large, seemingly volatile machine. Panicked by the fact that it looks like it's going to explode at any moment, Borden shuts it off right as Angers is performing his big finish. There's a huge commotion and Borden attempts to flee, fighting past Angers on the way out and being very confused that Angers appears to be translucent. 7 weeks later, he hears that Angers has died of injury sustained during a magical act. He confesses to himself that he is probably responsible and regrets his lifelong war with his fellow magician. Borden explains that while he remained moderately successful and wealthy for the remainder of his career to date, he lost his passion for the craft and his desire to perfect it. There's a last addendum to the memoir in which an utterly terrified Borden recounts what appears to be an attack from Angers' ghost, who demanded to know which one he was before attempting to kill him with a knife. Borden admitted that he didn't know anymore, and the ghost appears to change his mind and leaves. Starting part 3 from Kate's perspective, she explains that Borden may or may not have died of a heart attack a week later. She then tells Andrew about her very sucky family and a traumatic event from her childhood when her father and the grandson of Alfred Borden had tried to patch up their family's historical differences by having dinner together, but for reasons she never discovered, it had all gone horribly wrong and ended in a huge drunken argument. Kate and her sister had grown terrified when the adults had gone into the basement to settle the dispute, taking Borden's 2-year-old great-grandson Nicky with them, but had followed them down there anyway and witnessed the adults messing with a huge device throwing electrical currents around. Clear from the description that it was Rupert Angers' mysterious device. Angers III had tried to goad Borden III into stepping into it to prove a point, but Borden III had wussed out at the last minute. To everyone's horror, Angers III responded by throwing poor little Borden IV Nicky into the machine, appearing to kill him instantly. Kate's family had fallen apart after that, and her attempts to find out what had happened that day and why no one had been arrested for murder were met with evasions and straight-up gaslighting. After years of investigating on her own, she discovered evidence that Nicky had miraculously survived despite being obviously dead in her memories and had been adopted after his father abandoned him. She explains that she believes that Andrew is in fact Nicky Borden. Andrew is receptive to the idea, but determined to twist it to fit his long-lost twin narrative, which leads to some tension. He makes one last failed attempt to get Kate to shag him, then they go to their separate beds. Once again, without any recognizable diegetic setup, the book switches to the personal diary of Angers, starting with his early childhood and first experience witnessing magic, which sparked off his lifelong love of the craft. Rupert is the younger son of the immensely rich Lord Coldlow, but when his father dies, his older brother Henry inherits everything and pretty much kicks everyone else off the inheritance, giving Rupert a small allowance that will cease at age 21. This is also the first time we hear about the family vault, a cavernous tomb where dead relatives are laid to rest. Very spoopy by the sounds of it. Rupert moves out by 19 and changes his name to Angers, living rough in squalor while he tries to get his magician career off the ground, meeting in the process his wife Julia, a sassy, headstrong woman who becomes his assistant, but also his teacher, business partner, and co-trick designer. Struggling to stand out due to Angers' slight lack of imagination and needing to earn some cash when they discover that Julia's expecting, she has the idea that they try their hand at this newfangled mysticism of pretending to be able to commune with the dead and charging for seances. After some success, they're attempting to help some children find closure for the untimely death of their mother when disaster strikes. Some asshole called Borden exposes that they're faking and knocks down Julia in the process. Shortly later, Julia suffers a miscarriage and spirals into deep depression. Angers then gives his side of the story regarding the many years they spent sabotaging each other, mentioning something that Borden omitted from his memoir, that he eventually took it way too far. He pretended to be an audience volunteer and tied unslippable knots around Angers, leading to him almost drowning in a tank of water, saved only by the quick actions of his engineer, Mr. Cutter. Eventually, Angers gets word that Borden has an amazing new trick involving teleportation and is quite impressed with his rival for perfecting such a mysterious and enchanting technique. His engineer, Mr. Cutter, is satisfied in assuming that Borden simply has an identical twin, but Angers is unconvinced and even less so when he starts a general acquaintanceship with a journalist called Arthur, who swears blind that he has checked official records and no such twin exists. Angers goes on a tour of America and he misses his wife and the children they had together dearly. So much so he begins an affair with an American fangirl called Olivia, who he hires as an assistant. This leads to Cutter quietly quitting so he doesn't have to be an accessory to infidelity. Andre decides to leave his formerly beloved wife and kids to be with Olivia and moves out of his home, though he still provides for them financially. Angers tries to compete with Borden by hiring a drunk, struggling actor to be his double, but finds him to be an insufferable, raging douchebag and gets in trouble when the double rats him out to Olivia about cheating on her as well. Throughout this time period, Borden has been upping his game regarding messing with Angers, though Angers claims that for a long period he resisted taking revenge in the hopes that it would finally put an end to the pointless war. He's eventually driven too far and sees making Borden obsolete by developing a better trick than the new transported man as his only revenge. Most of his attempts fail utterly. Angers and Olivia's relationship declines rapidly until she decides to become Borden's new assistant and get the secret for him. This temporarily revitalizes their relationship, but after a long absence she returns to tell him that she's leaving him for Borden, but she has the method of the trick written down for him and gives him a note with the name Tesla on it. Angers travels to meet with Tesla and his assistant Mr. Ali, and while he eventually realizes that Borden meant to send him on a wild goose chase, Tesla is actually able to help him by building him a short-range teleporter. The one catch is it appears to transfer one's soul into a new body and leaves a lifeless husk behind, a body frozen in time, unable to even decompose. Angers comes to refer to these remains as prestige materials. Angers' plans to reveal his amazing new trick are disrupted by the death of his older brother Henry, who has made an absolute mess out of running the family estate before popping his clogs childless. Now unexpectedly allured, Angers considers giving up being a magician, but after he and Julia rekindle their romance and get back together, she talks him into going back into it, partly because she misses it herself and partly because he needs an income to save his dilapidated estate. Angers is sent a letter by Mr. Ali relaying that Tesla has packed up and run off to escape creditors, but he has arranged to have his finished machine delivered. Angers successfully develops his new routine, which he calls in a flash, and gains massive recognition. He makes a note that disposing of the prestige materials created is a challenge, but he figured it out. Arthur visits Angers and tells him that all of these years later he has belatedly discovered that Borden does indeed have an identical twin brother and had simply faked the official record to hide it. Angers is shaken by this knowledge but decides not to do anything with it. He is just going to live his best life. Angers plans to retire for good and end on a bang, as he wishes to fake his death before returning to his old life as an aristocrat with his family. Alas, before he can put his plan into motion, Borden switches off his machine mid-act and Angers is sort of half teleported to his destination. His body is left still alive but very sickly and enfeebled, and his spirit is transformed into a only semi-corporeal revenant. They get split up for a bit, during which physical Angers completes his death faking and revenant Angers tries to kill one of the Borden twins but can't bring himself to follow through with it. Then they are reunited and feel much better around each other. Arthur turns up again to tell him that one of the Borden brothers, possibly the one that Revenant Angers scared the crap out of, had died of a heart attack in front of Olivia, and then the other had gaslit her into thinking that he'd faked his death as a way of breaking up with her. Now left without a job or lover, to raise some cash, Olivia sells Angers the private memoir that Borden had been writing, which she's hung onto despite the other brother's attempts to get it back. On reading Borden's inner thoughts, Angers laments on how in other circumstances they could have been good friends, bonded by their love of the magician's craft. He also sees that the two Bordens were so committed to their lifelong act of being the same person they had lost their sense of individual identity. They were both in love with their wife, who he assumes must have known what was up but somehow accepted it, and they were both in love with their mistress, who really didn't know the secret apparently. Angers decides that his final act of revenge will be to rewrite some of the memoir so it doesn't give any secrets explicitly away, then publish it, letting the other Borden and the rest of the world know that he had the last laugh. Shortly later, physical Angers dies as his weakened body is destroyed by illness and cancer. Revenant Angers writes on for a bit, confessing that he and physical Angers had been using the teleporter's duplication side effect to counterfeit gold and money to leave to his descendants. In the last entry, Revenant Angers explains that he doesn't want to live on as a wraith forever, but has too strong a survival instinct to intentionally end his existence with no hope, so he has decided to teleport himself into the exact spot of physical Angers' body, hoping that this will restore them both into a single being and either kill him as well, or hopefully bring them both back to life to live as a full person. Returning to the 90s for a final time, in the middle of the night, Andrew decides to follow what he believes to be his twin's telepathic voice, calling him into the family crypt. Because it ties into all of her trauma, Kate elects not to join him. This is where Priest really starts flexing his horror writing skills. I'm not going to lie, I found the rest of the book utterly terrifying as Andrew descends into the crypt and finds out that Angers kept all of the leftover prestige bodies he created over the years racked up and labelled. He finally finds what he still refers to as his brother, his 2-year-old Prestige, and yoinks it, as when he's making physical contact with it, he feels complete for the first time in his life. He's then confronted by Revenant Angers himself, whose death or resurrection attempt apparently failed and is still hanging around in ghost form. Andrew cheeses it out of the crypts, and he and Kate watch in abstract terror as Revenant Angers strolls out after him and walks off into the night. The end. I have to confess, the whole Andrew brother thing confused me for most of the book. I mean, I assumed the implication was that the machine was not used correctly when he was thrown into it, so a part of his soul was left behind, trapped in an almost dead Prestige, which, holy feck, that's dark. I'm also wondering, what is the plan for Andrew from now on? Is he going to carry around what appears to be the dead body of a child for the rest of his life? Like, I feel like that would raise questions. I was also mildly thrown by the lack of setup for the transitions between the framing device and the journals, especially when there was an in-universe reason why Andrew and Kate would know what was in Borden's book, but drew attention to the fact that they never found Angers' records, so Part 2 was diegetic, but Part 4 wasn't? However, I really appreciated that Priest differentiated between Borden's story being a memoir that was written over just 1 or 2 years, and Angers' being a lifelong journal, i.e. Borden's is clearly written with the clarity of hindsight and with a relatively consistent tone, while Angers' writing reflects the radical changes in his attitude and personality that occurred as he aged several decades. It's just, a cool extra mile to go. Final thoughts. First off, I just want to take a second to express how bizarre I find it that the Nolans seem to have decided that Borden, the egotistical, snobbish, gatekeeping, obsessive magician, was clearly the real hero of the story, framing his approach to magic as the more honourable of the two, and transforming Angers into a cartoonish supervillain for the final stretch, mirror universe goatee and all. Even putting aside their pick for it, having a clear winner of the feud at the end kind of takes a shit on the cautionary tales factor, leaving it somewhat open to interpretation if suffering for your art is being villainized or romanticized. I also hated almost beyond words that they felt what was really missing from this story was giving both wives the woman in the fridge treatment. The Nolans also committed what I consider to be one of the cardinal sins of adaptations, creating plot holes that were not present in the original version of events. While adding the twist that Angers was murdering one of the two versions of him created in every teleportation adds a much darker, edgier sense of horror to the end of the story, I don't think the film really succeeds in establishing why he was doing it. Once he had a perfect copy of himself, he had all of the means at his disposal to do the trick the same way as Borden, but with all of his superior showmanship. Okay, yes, it would be rather difficult to conceal the fact that you're two people now, but I suspect rather easier than dealing with the psychological damage of knowing you have a 50-50 chance of dying every time you perform your closing act, assuming that's even how that works and it's not just the original dying every time. Regarding the two Bordens, in the film, the Nolans chose to make it clear that both brothers have a distinct preference for different parts of their lifestyles. One was happy in his family life and clearly uncomfortable having ScarJo as a mistress, and the other was in love with ScarJo and so clearly miserable playing the husband and father he was emotionally abusing his wife. They went out of their way to make a huge deal out of how torturous it was for them to live like this, but once again failed to establish why they were doing it then. The Bordens of the book chose to switch back and forth because they both genuinely felt like they were the same person. They didn't have to. The film Bordens could very easily have kept to their favoured roles and coordinated to not appear in public at the same time. That would have satisfied the living the act requirement and not made everyone's lives miserable. Accents were an interesting subject in this. They decided that part of Angers' ruse to hide the fact that he was a lord was to adopt an American accent, then presumably changed Olivia's nationality to British to avoid confusion, but still cast an American to play her. Amusingly, as questionable as ScarJo's attempt at a British accent was, she actually sounded more natural to me than Christian Bale, who actually is British, but has such a pronounced Cockney accent it sounds like he must be faking it. So yeah, we have an Australian playing an Englishman pretending to be an American playing an Englishwoman that was originally American, and a man who is technically Welsh but sounds like a London stereotype. I'm not unsympathetic to the colossal challenges that this book represents. Trying to adapt the original, highly segmented, same 30 years but from a different perspective format into a film would have been an absolute nightmare. I've touched upon this many times in the past, but regular time jumps are one of those things that are super easy to do in books, books, but can be awkward and jarring in films. Now, imagine trying to incorporate dozens of them into a plot twice. I mean, I can't even imagine how you would go about doing that and not ending up with a confusing mess. I just can't get behind Nolan's solution, though. He took both stories, combined them, then chopped up the result and reordered it, and I just don't see how that helped. Nolan also claims he was attempting to make the 3 acts of the film reflect a recurring theme in the book, which states that a good magic trick has 3 essential parts: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige, and that it took a long time to figure out how to achieve cinematic versions of the very literary devices that drive the intrigue of the story. My issue with this is, if you actually look at how Priest described these 3 things, you realize that these words are just a flowery way of saying setup, confrontation, conclusion. So the Nolan spent 5 years rediscovering the 3-act story structure. Bravo. Christopher Priest himself has been pretty open about his opinion on this film, and I will link to what he wrote below because it was sassy, and I kind of love that. Satisfyingly, he and I agree on most points. Despite the film being known for its twists, he felt that it was a poor choice to try to turn what was never a secret in his book into a big reveal at the end of the film. Even leaving that aside, this just isn't the same story. The book was a very tragic tale of 3 men who really should have been friends, absolutely destroying what should have been very happy lives because of misunderstandings, insurmountable ego, and petty vengeance, resulting in a truly pointless rivalry. The film was a tale of 2 former friends with extremely justified bad blood brought on by a string of terrible decisions, locked in a deadly struggle to destroy one another and come out on top that eventually led to them both becoming utterly reprehensible monsters. Both stories have value, but as an adaptation, it seems entirely off-point and reeks of successful filmmakers believing that they can improve on something without really thinking through all the ramifications of certain changes. It's just not a very good adaptation, even if it's an okay film, and because it relies so heavily on big reveals of plot twists to be memorable, I think the Nolans are very lucky that this book is not particularly well known anymore, because I don't think anyone who has read it would be able to enjoy their movie. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. Please don't forget to like, comment, and share to help keep the horrors of the YouTube algorithm at bay. If you're new here and enjoyed yourself, consider subscribing for more content. Check me out on Twitter and Instagram for very deep, important thoughts and a lot of cat photos. And if you'd like to support the show or commission a future episode, be sure to have a gander at my Patreon page. Please take care of yourselves out there, and I will see you soon.
Tell me, do you wanna go on a lifelong quest for revenge against a rival magician, chasing that white whale who looks just like Christian Bale? Oh shit, I murdered my clone. With the rage of a Wolverine, I'll crush his magical dreams. Steampunk contraptions, cement satisfaction. Oh shit, I murdered my clone.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Hote, Satel Spurtloff, and Kat Harker. Shout out to Ilnej for performing this awesome tune. Check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's co-producer, Kate Robinson. She does some really amazing work on her channel that I think you would really enjoy, so be sure to check that out too. Witnessing magic, which sparked off his lifelong love of the Lovecraft. Oh yeah. Trying to stop the microphone wobbling is like giving a very gentle hand job to a very tall robot. Dance for me, little kitty monkey. Yeah, no, that's fair. No. Watch the face, that's the moneymaker.